Every day I get people asking me if they can come to Canada, if they can claim asylum in Canada, if things are so bad they're just going to jump up the border, they're going to become Canadian. And some of them are joking, some of them are like, please Canada, save us, please adopt us. And some of them are serious, saying like, I'm in danger, can I run for the border? I get these in my DMs, I get them in my comment section, depending on the news cycle, dozens a day. And this has been happening. Today is April 14th. This has been happening since February 8th. I get this constantly. I get this on TikTok. I get it on other social media platforms as well. Consistently, my answer has been no. And people think that sounds mean. And a lot of times Americans get really mad at me for saying this. But there is very specific reasons. I have made other videos in the past about this, about why I think the answer is no, or why I don't encourage people to do this. Do not run for the border. Back in February, there were cases of people, coming across the border and like, it's very dangerous. It's very cold, but there's more than just, it's because if you try to come across and seek asylum, something kicks in called the Safe Third Country Agreement. And because of the policy shifts with Trump right now, people are being refused asylum and they're being sent back to the US. And once they get to the US, they are put in ICE detention. Now, the Safe Third Country Agreement goes back quite a ways. It was kicked around as policy ideas for quite some time. And then after 9/11 got advanced really quickly. In 2002 is when the policy came about. And 2004 is when it went into law. And then in 2023, there were some amendments to it. But it basically was an agreement set out between Canada and the US to how to manage our border more effectively, with the concept being that Canada and the US were both safe countries. Therefore, somebody coming in to seek asylum, whatever country they landed in first, that's the country they had to seek asylum in. So you couldn't say, come in from Mexico and seek asylum in Canada if you were coming in through the land border, because the first country you arrived in would be the US, and that's where you would have to seek asylum. And so traditionally what has happened is if people make it to the Canadian border, the land border, although this has now been extended to water borders as well, but if people come to Canada through the US and they try to seek asylum here, we turn them around. And Customs and Border Patrol says like no, and they release them back into the US. And traditionally, these people have not been detained or punished really, but with Trump's new administration, there has been mass changes to that. This article came out in the Globe and Mail today, April 14th. It is really important to read, but it is for subscribers only. I am going to read to you one passage. Since the policy shift, more than 500 asylum seekers have been redirected back to the US, either at official ports of entry to Canada or at irregular land crossings, according to Canada Border Services Agency. 500. As I read it, that's just sort of February, March timeline, because that's when these changes have come into place. And the new official US policy is to send them to an ICE detention center where we know not what happens to them after that. Now, the Safe Third Country Agreement applies to people who are seeking asylum, not from the US, not born from the US, but seeking asylum from another country that they've arrived to the US first or Canada first and they're seeking asylum. And my answer is still do not come, obviously, for people who are seeking asylum and they would violate that. You'd end up back in ICE and they would probably deport you back to where you came from. So if you are a refugee, I would not recommend just trying to go to the border. If you're a US citizen, if you were born in the US, Canada is not currently sort of openly said we are taking refugees from the Trump regime. That's something, a lot more would have to happen before international countries get on board with saying that's why. In the past, we have taken asylum seeking from people who are being persecuted for like being gay, that kind of thing. But currently, to my knowledge, we do not have policies in place around just being American. So those of you who are American, who were born in America, even if you are in a minority situation, you are in danger, you still cannot come here and try to seek asylum at the land border or the air border, any of the borders, because you won't be accepted. So the best thing for you to do now, if you have no other legal citizenship to leave, which there's pros and cons to that also, you need to stay and fight. This is the time where you need to stay and fight for the country that you live in. But beyond all that, I just wanted to come and make a video to actually say, please do not try to just come to the border, especially if you are already have sought asylum in the US. If you are somebody who is at risk from ICE, until Canada changes our safe third country agreement, which Amnesty International in February has called for Canada to no longer recognize the US as a safe third country. But it hasn't yet, and Parliament is not in session at the moment. We are in the middle of an election. Maybe this is visited after we have a new prime minister, depending on who that prime minister is. I'm not sure, but at this point, if you try to come to the Canadian border, the land border, or arrive through air, if you've already sought asylum in the US, you will be refused entry and turned around. There's a couple of exceptions to people who are not refused entry under the safe third country. That's unaccompanied minors. If you're under 18, you have to have all sorts of paperwork. It's a very long thing. I would recommend going to the Government of Canada website to look at this. Unaccompanied minors and people who are rejoining their family with the proper documentation. So if all of your family lived in Canada already, you may be granted an exception, but these are very, very rare circumstances. It is not worth the risk, in my opinion, to just come to the border and try that. I realize that things are very dire in the United States at the moment. I know that it must be very scary, but I don't personally think it would be ethical of me on social media to advocate for people to try to come here right now, because I think you will end up in a worse situation, and it would not be safe. So just to let you know, this is what's going on. 500 people have already been caught up in this. Do not become one of them.